All right, there we go. Welcome, everyone. Welcome to our virtual panel today on continuing education as an agent of change. I've been looking forward to this for months now, and I'm so excited and honored to be hosting and moderating with some of the most esteemed leaders that I've ever worked with in continuing education. Today, we're going to talk a little bit about change within the scope of continuing ed, and we're going to talk a bit about innovation. We're going to talk about leadership. We're going to talk about barriers to overcome. You know, change is something that we're all struggling with and that we're all working through in our professional lives and our personal lives. And I couldn't be more excited to talk specifically about continuing education on the forefront and hear from leaders today. I am your moderator. You are stuck with me for the next 43 minutes. My name is Shadee Barkan. I'm SVP of Global Partnerships for 2U. We work with top-tier institutions on empowering their online education, and I am fortunate enough to work with 3 of the institutions presenting today. So we will pivot to introductions, and if you could each share your name, your title, your institution, and also let's mix it up with a fun fact, that would be terrific.
So why don't I get started? I'm Marc, Executive Director for Professional Education and Academic Ventures at George Mason. My fun fact is, in the wake of COVID and the Zoom meetings, I've taken up fly fishing just to relax a bit. So that's my fun fact.
Hi, I'm Gary Matkin. I'm a Dean of Continuing Education and Vice Provost for Career Pathways at University of California, Irvine. My fun fact, maybe it's not so fun sometimes, is I have 40 rose bushes in my small garden, and it takes a lot of time and effort, and occasionally it makes me bleed.
My name is Maureen MacDonald. I'm the Dean of the School of Continuing Studies at the University of Toronto. And my fun fact, I guess, is that I've attended 3 universities. I've worked at another 3 universities. And some days I feel like every advancement professional in the country wants to talk to me.
Hi, I'm Richard Novak. I'm the Vice President for Continuing Studies and Distance Education at Rutgers University in New Jersey. And my fun fact is, in my day job, I am just always working in the realm of ideas and thoughts. And my fun fact is I like to work with my hands. And so one of my hobbies is woodworking, another is gardening, and that really gets me out of my head.
Terrific. It sounds like you and Gary should connect on that. I am not sharing a fun fact because I don't know how to top any of that. So we will just dive right into our first question. And for the larger group who is participating, this is a question that each panelist will be answering because I think it's really important in terms of shaping the next 42 minutes and how we will be thinking about sort of agents of change. So the question is really rooted in drivers. And in order to effectively drive any kind of change, you really need to think about sort of what are the fundamental dynamics and what are some of the drivers behind change. So to summarize, as you're thinking about continuing education and this ever-changing landscape with COVID, can you each share from your own unique perspectives a driver that is really critical to achieving change?
I'll start with the competitive landscape. The competitive landscape for university continuing education is changing rapidly, accelerated by the COVID crisis. My first thesis is that the online degree market is being rapidly saturated. We see so many mega universities such as Southern New Hampshire University, ASU, and others getting hugely into degree production. We see third parties like 2U helping universities get into the business. We see every university that I know of creating new degrees. We're going to rapidly reach the saturation point in degree completion and online degrees. And what that's going to mean is it's going to turn most universities and other organizations toward professional, non-degree professional sort of programs. And so we're going to see a huge amount of competition in that area. And the digital credentialing, which we'll hear about soon is also a big factor in fostering that. One big competitive event is the advent of the big box stores. We've got Coursera, edX, and others that are going across the country and across the world, offering high quality, very inexpensive programs. UCI, for instance, has over 100 programs on Coursera. We're one of the top 10. We're competing with Rutgers, for instance, in project management in New Jersey, whereas other universities are competing with us in Orange County. So we've got a very interesting dynamic going on with regard to how our competitive landscape is changing. The big issue is, how are we going to respond? The first way I think we should respond is to create channels for our current programs that go beyond our service areas. We see that in, for instance, Coursera and edX, going out to around the world with our courses. Second, form curriculum partnerships with third parties and other universities. Coursera currently, for instance, has over 3,500 courses. There's no way that any university continuing education organization is going to be able to actually present that broad spectrum of courses across within their service area. So we've got to compete by getting more of our own courses out there. For instance, third-party people like Trilogy and 2U with boot camps have come in and helped us serve our students. Other universities are beginning to share. UCI is heading a program sharing network where we have 10 universities that are sharing programs, so that we don't have to incur the huge development costs for our own markets. Third, we should really concentrate on serving our local regional workforces. The big box stores such as Coursera and so forth, they cannot possibly have the relationship with local employers and local students and local workforce that we have. Another way of responding is to actually provide career services for employees, and that's really important in this era where we've got a COVID recession coming at us. And finally, we need to get much more sophisticated in our marketing efforts. The competition is heating up, and we just have to be much more sophisticated in what we're doing. So I see this as a huge challenge for all of us, but it also embedded in that challenge are some wonderful opportunities, and as well as some threats. We need to recognize the strengths that we have, the competitive advantages we have in universities, and build on them and capitalize them and create new approaches and appropriate resource allocations to help us serve our students and our service area as well.
Thanks so much, Gary. That was incredibly comprehensive and helpful. Maureen, Rich, and Marc, anything sort of to add to that quickly as we start to navigate through other components of those drivers?
Well, I can certainly speak to some of the drivers that we're facing, and to put it into context, we're a 100% non-credit unit within the university. So we're not offering degrees. We have a variety of certificates and whatnot. And I think for us, I'm going to just flag two quick drivers that we're looking at. One is certainly the evolving needs of employers. We need to be responsive to evolving content and to supporting the needs for new skills in the marketplace. But we also have to be responsive to employer needs for changing formats and for different modalities. The things that maybe worked 5 and 10 years ago are not something that's going to work with the workplace of today. Another driver for us, and I think this is maybe a little bit more confined to being in Toronto, is that about 50% of the people that live in Toronto were not born in Canada. So we get a tremendous number of folks that come in that were educated internationally and are looking to find successful career paths within Canada. And so one of the drivers for us and one of the impetus in terms of the things that we do is really trying to make sure that we're able to align our education with what their career aspirations might be. And so between the employer needs and the things that these internationally educated professionals bring to our country, we're using that as a rationale and as a basis for why we do some of what we do in the way we do it. So I think I'll leave it there.
Yeah, for us, really quickly, it's about speed and time. When we look at the market today, we know that learners need less time to be able to learn a piece of what higher ed has to offer. And employers, likewise, need people to skill up more quickly, especially in our current environment. So for us, the key driver of change is building micro-credentials, as Gary was alluding to, alternatives to degrees, ways of breaking a degree into digestible components so that people are more quickly able to just get a critical skill that they need validated through university. So for us, micro-credentials at Mason is a big part of continuing education and being able to help someone across a lifetime of learning in smaller increments that are more directly aligned to what the labor market needs.
And I would add that I think one of the key drivers is diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I would back that up by saying, as we look around our universities, in our local communities, in our nation, we see a racial reckoning and increased cries for affordability, and surveys like Strata that reveal fewer people trust a traditional degree program as the way forward for career advancement. So in terms of the greater emphasis on social justice, movements such as Black Lives Matter have been embraced broadly and widely. And more people of all stripes have come to realize the impact of things like institutional racism, but more importantly, the rich asset that's presented by the diversity of all types. So at Rutgers, on the macro level, we have a new university president who has immediately begun putting words into action with developing and implementing a strategy for diversity, equity, and inclusion across the university. He fast-tracked an equity audit, has publicly reported these findings, and appointed a senior vice president for equity to lead systemic change. He's talked about Rutgers becoming helping Rutgers to become a beloved community which seeks talent everywhere, is intentionally diverse, dedicated to justice, and engaging the entire university community in seeing and helping each other, in both seeing and helping each other. From a more micro perspective, in my division of continuing studies, several years ago, I established a diversity, equity, and inclusion committee for our division. This committee has been actively engaged in reviewing what we do and recommending changes. I think diversity is relatively easy, frankly, especially in New Jersey. You cast a net and you'll capture a diverse audience just by chance. Equity and inclusion are much harder because those are structural, they're systemic, and those are intentional changes that must occur. So I believe DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion, is now and will continue to be a key driver for change at Rutgers, and one of the things that we are focused on as we innovate.
Perfect, thank you all. So as we are aligning on what those drivers are, I want to continue to come back to that as we're shaping the conversation for the rest of the panel discussion. But there's something that I want to dive a little deeper into, and there's been so much talk over the last few days about, change and opportunities and all these new ways of thinking about innovation. And it's very exciting, but part of what's been happening relative to all the change is that it's also opening up big, tough to solve recurrent problems. What are some examples of what you're seeing and how are you overcoming them?
Absolutely. The first challenge is just reaching people. In this environment, especially in an environment where people are overwhelmed with digital media, the signal that we have about what it is that we bring to their lives is harder and harder to get out amidst all the noise. So one of the big challenges is in an online environment where we're attempting to make a connection with someone, cutting through the noise and demonstrating that the value and the quality of what you're going to experience in that online setting is just as powerful, is just as meaningful, offers as many connections with faculty, and enables you to actually build not only your learning record, but your career. That's a hard message to get through with the amount of noise and volume in the sort of digital space right now. So that's certainly one of the areas that I think is a huge challenge for us right now.
And even before you get to the actual experience, I think access is becoming a really key factor that we need to look at. With the digitization of learning, not everyone has all the tools that they can access what they need. You're looking at families that have kids homeschooled, you've got people working from home, and then trying to add education onto that. Having the tools at their disposal to be able to access what they need to is becoming an increasing challenge. And then also the time that it takes. People are juggling all kinds of things in their lives right now. And so I think just the notion of access becomes a real key element in this. And so I know in our school, we've been looking at trying to create additional financial supports for learners that may have found themselves adversely affected financially through COVID. And we're also looking at trying to curate some free content so that people do have access when they need it, and it's something that they're able to take advantage of.
Go ahead.
Okay, so I've mentioned diversity, equity, and inclusion as a priority at Rutgers with our new president and initiatives we've taken in the Division of Continuing Studies. And I think continuing education departments across Rutgers University are engaged and have been for some time with things like DEI programming geared towards mental health professionals, culturally responsive trauma-informed care programs offered to corporations, nonprofits, government agencies, et cetera. With our instruction and training moving to virtual, remote, and online, I would suggest that DEI is no exception. And I would also argue that historically, I think continuing education has been attuned to social movements and has responded accordingly. So I'd like to, just a couple examples. For example, the GI Bill, we saw tons of adults going back to college. The civil rights movement, we saw liberalizing the curriculum. And now more active older adults, and the OLLI movement, and the demands of employers and the alignment of CE courses to job skills that are needed, and so on. So I think the current situation requires that CE align with the current social movements, supporting diversity in curriculum and staffing and so on.
Going back to what Maureen said in her opening statement, I see a very great inefficiency in the talent marketplace between the talent the universities possess and the needs of the workplace. Right now, universities are pretty good maybe at doing career services for their students and looking and helping students get entry-level jobs when they graduate, either from graduate school or undergraduate school. But they also, all of them have talent pools that go beyond the current students, including the talent pools in continuing education graduate programs and continuing education programs, and also alumni, huge talent pools among alumni. And so one of the things we have to do better in terms of serving our local economies is to make this marketplace work a lot better for everybody concerned, and involve all three of those talent pools that all of us have command over.
I think that's great. In fact, I want to take that a bit further. I mean, what I've always really admired and respected about continuing education has been the strong relationship with industry, how continuing ed departments and divisions are engaging with industry, and the connectivity there. So can you share some examples of, in this COVID environment, how are you engaging with industry now, and what are some examples of what's been most effective and why?
One of the things that we've done is partnered with associations of groups of industries. So for us in Washington area, the Greater Washington Partnership has provided a way for us to understand a multi-industry perspective on what the labor market needs. What's most effective and been most valuable for us in that process is having them provide to us a sense of what their specific skills are, the KSAs, the knowledge, skills, and abilities that they need to be able to plug skill gaps. They can give us positions and describe titles, but really understanding the fundamental skills and enabling a greater transparency between what the labor market is looking for and our ability to align our curriculum to that labor market has been invaluable for us to create some of those micro-credentials that I talked about before. And it really is so critical to understand the multi-industry perspective. So that's why these associations, especially for continuing ed, are not only critical, but I think they're growing. I think you're going to see in the future groups of industries coming together to work specifically with a critical front door to a university, which is continuing ed, because what we're thinking about is exactly what they need, professional development of their labor force. But understanding that alignment is, I think, the key question for the next decade is how do I create, skills transparency, and understanding what those needs are is essential for us.
I'd like to... Sorry, go. I was going to say the holy grail to that is the embedding of these badges and digital credentials inside the undergraduate and graduate programs, so that as students gain their degrees, they're also gaining the credibility with the workforce and with employers in order to make them more competitive for jobs out there. And so, and in addition to that, as Marc was indicating, these digital credentials have pedagogical value, because we find that students who are in courses with badges actually do better on the course. And so there's a cascade of benefits for that digital credentialing is really going to make a big difference in how we do our business in the future.
I'd like to jump back to the portal idea. And at Rutgers, we established a corporate engagement center, and it's co-sponsored by and it connects with multiple units across the university. It's a large, complex research university. We frankly have a lot of faculty who individually go out and deal with corporations. We have a lot of continuing education departments that go out on their own. We really dissipate our efforts. So this was an intentional structural change to coordinate in the areas of research collaboration with our faculty, licensing technologies, so Rutgers licensing certain technologies to industries, developing training for professionals that's customized and that engages our multiple university CE providers. And then the final link in this chain, if you will, is that the center also links with Rutgers Career Services and provides a resource for employers. And while several of the larger CE units also have staff who regularly engage with industry, there are also discipline-specific engagements that are deep and ongoing.
I think I might just add on to that. One of the things that we do that we've found extremely beneficial, and not just in this day and age, but that we've done for a number of years, is really relying on our instructors, who are largely working professionals as opposed to university faculty, to really give us a sense of what is going on in their organizations. They're living this day to day in terms of the needs of the organizations, the needs of the professions, and so they provide us with really great insights as to the skills and competencies that are in demand.
Maureen and others, where do you see opportunities to best leverage those insights and work more closely with sort of campus and other institutions within the university landscape? Being on the forefront of change, being on the forefront of these drivers, and now this environment that we're in with COVID, where do you see opportunities to better connect? And also going back to Gary's point about some of the inefficiencies that you've been seeing, I'd love to hear a little bit more about that as well.
Well, one of the places I think is so valuable for us to be connecting to are community colleges. One of our big emphasis, one of our big focuses is to build a pathway between our regional community college, Northern Virginia, Nova, to Mason, where you have an associate's degree connected to a bachelor's degree. That's given us a tremendous opportunity to not only connect curriculum and reduce inefficiencies between two very large institutions. Nova is the second largest community college in the country. We're the largest public in the, so it's a hugely complex technical process. But the real opportunity is not just the efficiency, but the ability to bring in providers and industry to help us build pathways that are career relevant. So you get from college to career. The best example in our region, obviously, is Amazon, and it's moved to Northern Virginia. And so working with AWS to figure out how could we create something in cloud computing that allows you to start at Nova and finish at Mason and call that a bachelor degree is a great start. But it's only limited to those who want degrees. We need to make, as continuing ed, a bigger offering to those that are professionals. And so professionalizing those types of degrees into non-degree, non-credit offerings, I think is a critical way for us to build those connections.
I'd like to go on a slightly different path, and that is, and not to disagree with anything Marc said, but I think one of the lasting changes that I see, largely a result of COVID, is a greater acceptance of the efficacy of online learning and the recognition that we need to continue to provide a virtual component in everything we do. So by way of example, we have had to shift multiple conferences, both large and small, to a virtual format. And what we found was we were able to attract new audiences who otherwise weren't able to attend our face-to-face conferences. This is a good example. The ASU GSV conference is another, very good example of that. So as a result, we're implementing a new comprehensive platform that will allow us now to offer robust virtual conferences. So I see that as a new line of business for us. I see it continuing even when we do face-to-face conferencing in the future. And I would point to the recent Strata survey that notes that American preferences between degree and non-degree education and training options are chiefly driven by relevance. I think that's a clarion call for continuing education, to be relevant, to listen, to engage in active feedback with clients and potential clients. But here's the other thing that we don't talk about. I think we also have to be a voice and an advocate within the university community for these preferences. We need to help the university community understand what's going on, what the market's demanding, and how the university can use all of its resources to be responsive.
I'd follow up on that with a slight alteration of what you said, Rich, and that is that I don't think any university, and certainly not any CE unit within a university, can possibly serve the entire needs of a service area by itself. And that is going to put a huge emphasis on the partnerships that we've already talked about. There are curriculum partnerships where we share programs. There are partnerships for services such as career services. There are partnerships between universities on sharing co-development costs. There are all kinds of partnerships, and many of our university continuing education units do not have the capacity really or the understanding about how to create and maintain and keep vibrant these partnerships. We're so used to doing our own thing that we sometimes forget that we can get help from others. So I think one of the big trends is more and more partnerships with both for-profit, nonprofit, and other universities.
I agree with everything that everybody said so far, and I think I might just add on that some of the things that we're going to start to see a lot more of is, I think, a greater swing to more significant learner control in the identifying their particular educational needs and how they go about accessing the content that's going to help them meet those needs. And to a degree, I think we're going to be able to do that through partnerships. I think, as Rich has said, greater online connections in terms of not only the content, but all the surrounding services that go into that. If the last few months have taught us anything, we know that we can do almost everything virtually in some way, shape, or form. So I think those are things that are going to be things we're going to be facing going into the future.
So we're going to pivot now into questions from the participants in the audience, and there's quite a few coming in, so bear with me as I navigate through here. And if I could just remind you to please mute if you're not speaking, that would be terrific. I love this question. Okay. How do we know if the interest in online degrees and certificates is a sustainable long-term trend versus a temporary reaction to sheltering in place that won't reverse if and when the pandemic is resolved? Who wants to take that one first?
Can I start with that? I think it's a great question, which is, are we seeing these shorter forms of education simply in response to this environment? And I don't think that's necessarily the case. I think it's been a long trend for us to think about how to break higher education into smaller, more digestible components. We've often talked about the lifelong learner. We've talked about the 60-year curriculum. I think that the speed that I believe Rich or Gary was mentioning about skills and how quickly they change and how quickly we need to upgrade and continually move towards those new skills suggests that we're going to need that kind of offering for a very long time. It's not just in response, but I think all of us on this panel are accelerating our efforts in this area and being asked to accelerate our efforts in an environment where, you know, economic pressure is creating a need for upskilling and retraining at a level that we haven't seen before.
The acceptance of online learning and the growth of it was certainly evident before COVID came to us, but this is an acceleration process. But I see something else happening. You know, I want to go out to a bar and have a martini. There's going to be a kind of a backlash, I think, after a while for the alternative to remote interactions. And I think we should be ready also to be able to come back, particularly into the corporate world and so forth, and get people together again in a classroom. I think the classroom isn't going to disappear. Certainly online is going to grow dramatically as people get more comfortable with it. But I think we're always going to have a mixture of formats. And by the way, I believe that when we talk about online, classroom-based or hybrid, we're using dinosaur terms. We're continuously looking now at new pedagogical techniques. I don't think there's any classroom-based program that doesn't use some form of the internet or some sort of help in getting the learning objectives achieved. And so I think we still have to look at a balanced, kind of a balanced program.
Picking up on Gary's thought, I think that's absolutely right. I think we're using language that should disappear, and that what we should be talking about is engaging with learners and engaging with learners across the lifespan. And we use any modality that we have available to us to make that effective and robust and really learner-centric. I think those are critical concepts. The other, you know, access and affordability are two key issues in higher education. Those aren't going away. And I think, you know, virtual responses enable us to help to address some of those issues. But the other one that you know, we've kind of tiptoed around the edge of here is I think, again, there's a challenge for us in continuing education to be an advocate within the university and to work towards breaking down some of the silos that we have within our own university and some of the barriers that we have between what we call credit and non-credit. We're seeing increasingly that learners are looking for, as Marc talked earlier, let's give us nuggets that we need now. And it doesn't matter whether we call it credit or non-credit, but internally, you know, we deal with inside baseball. So we've got to figure out a way to break down some of those barriers and maybe look at some of our offerings that can then translate towards a degree, if that's what learners are interested in.
So our next question is one that I often hear about, you know, working very closely with thousands of employer partners in the alternative, you know, learning sort of department, boot camp, short courses. And this question is framed as follows. With possibly less students attending colleges and universities, meaning potentially less degrees, do you foresee employers defining the requirements for jobs differently? And do you see an increase in certificate programs or two-year programs? What will the new norm be?
I think we're already seeing it. We are already seeing it, and that's the feedback loop that I just referenced a moment ago, that we need to be tuned into, and that's going to intensify.
I think that what universities are engaged in is learning achievement testimony. When you get a grade in a course, that grades you on what you learned, not how you're going to apply that learning. And so I see a big shift from learning achievement to competency-based assessment. Employers and students want to see their competencies, want to see competencies in the workforce. Those competencies are well defined by the workforce and by employers in the workforce usually. We have to align university courses and university programs more closely to those particular competencies that are really worthwhile in the working world. And that does not mean that we all have to go to become vocational institutions. It means that we apply the theories to the basic competencies we have, and that is the fulfillment of the learning cycle. You learn something, and then you learn how to do something, and then you learn how to use that in your life to better your life. That's the completion of the cycle, and we have to start concentrating more on that than just the learning achievement side.
And if you pick up on the part of the question about how are employers going to frame that, I think they have defaulted to the degree because they know what that means. I think as we start to offer alternative credentials, much more competencies, and I think as we're able to strengthen our partnerships with employers, we start to develop a more common language, and I think we're able then to be able to start rolling out some of these different ways of doing things. And then I think you will find that the recruitment processes that organizations are using is going to pick up on that language.
Yeah, I think what Gary just said is really important, that employers want to assess the skill that they're acquiring. And we've seen a huge shift in employers thinking differently about the way in which they look at an alternative credential or a degree. They don't necessarily care all the time where it came from. What they care about is, can the employee do the task that's in front of them? And an assessment model is something that a lot of our employers are looking for. I talked to one employer recently who said, we're done looking at resumes. There's no information contained in a resume that's allowing us to make great decisions. We don't necessarily believe everything that we're looking at. At the end of the day, we need to assess and test and see whether or not that skill is there. That's a great opportunity for continuing ed units to learn how to better mirror what the employer assessment process is with our training and development. And I think there's very few other places in the university that's doing that kind of connection between employment and education.
There's a few questions in here about federal funding and the role that that plays within continuing education. It ties back to some of the drivers that we talked about, access. What are your thoughts and your sort of predictions and what we can expect in terms of changes in federal funding relative to the environment that we're in today?
I think there's a trend in the federal government, no matter which party you're looking at, to begin extending financial aid to people who are going not after degrees, but not restricting it to degree completion sort of thing. I think there's a long-term trend toward funding, helping people gain the skills they need through other than degrees. I think we're going to see that evolve in the next few years.
Even just picking up on that, internationally, we're seeing in multiple jurisdictions that central governments, the federal governments typically are finding ways to support development of continuing education, sort of post-degree education. And I think Singapore is probably the shining example of that, but we're seeing it it's happening in Canada, and we're seeing it also in some of the European jurisdictions.
Let me throw out a controversial idea here. I don't think the federal government can solve all of this. I think it's really a constellation of partners that has to be engaged. We have to recognize collectively, we have to recognize the value of continuing education of all types. of the competency base, of the alternative credentials, and what that means for a person's livelihood, for their life, for their health and well-being across the lifespan. And then I think, you know, our choice for where we plant our dollars directs those things or is evidence of the things that we value. So I think it's got to be a constellation of players. It's federal government, it's business and industry, it's nonprofits, it's the institution themselves offering you know, scholarships, etc. So we've all got to be involved in the solution. I think what happens is if we simply wait for the federal government to change policy, we're going to be waiting until I'm dead. And you know, we're going to be battling each other, and it'll be one of those situations where never have so many fought so hard over so little. No, we all are part of the solution. So let's all get together and do this.
I think there is some immediate support that the federal government in the form of the CARES Act and some of the workforce support, that helps a certain aspect of what we're struggling with right now in the short term. Long term, I agree with what you know Rich is saying, is it's going to be a group effort. And I think one of the more controversial topics is around income share agreements. I know all of us have explored that as a modality for helping someone place a bet on their future success. Rather than taking on debt, which usually is an evaluation of how badly I performed on my past debt. So it's an optimistic, and we're seeing in Washington kind of an across the aisle interest in the notion of income share agreements. I think it is a very controversial topic for many different reasons, but another piece to add to this equation.
Terrific. So I believe that we have 1 minute left. Last question. This is not an easy one to answer with 60 seconds or less. Assessments can be tricky. How do you think about assessments? You know what, we're actually wrapping up. Sorry about that. So we will table that for another time. Thank you to everyone for your participation, for your dynamic energy, and for such great candor. I learned a great deal, and I really appreciate all your time and energy. Have a wonderful day. Get some gardening in today.
You bet. Thank you.
Thank you guys so much. Have a great rest of your day. And thank you again all for joining us. I greatly appreciate it.
Thanks, Sam.
Right. Have a great one. Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Great job. Really great job. Thank you. That was fun.